Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. The Deep Woods. My name is John. When I was a kid, I lived in a quaint little town in Michigan with a group of friends whom I saw on a nightly basis. Our summer days were packed with adventure, sports, and all-around fun. However, things in that town just weren't right sometimes. This is the story of a wooded area just behind my house and what we found within them. My backyard was large, and behind us, there was a relatively large wooded area. A hike through the woods from my backyard out to the other side where a busy road cut through them would take you about 10 minutes. Of course, if you walked one direction long enough, it would take you to a busy road, so there was never a threat of getting lost. But many rumors surrounded the woods, tales mostly cooked up by the kids in our middle school, but that didn't make living right in front of them any easier. My backyard scared me at night, probably even more than my basement did. It wasn't always that way, though. I used to explore those woods fearlessly and eagerly, my sense of adventure always brightly burning. However, I started to see things back there. Little things that were probably just animals, but that's not where this story begins. It begins with the man in the hat. The man in the hat showed up on a night like any other. It was a hot summer night, and a few of us were out skateboarding in Jimmy's driveway. It was Jimmy, Rochelle, Claude, and I that night. Steve-O was grounded, and Sammy and Cody were playing a video game, claiming it was too humid out. So the four of us were skating outside, the night young. It was around 9 o'clock, and the sun was just about all the way down. The street lights bestowed us with enough sight that we were still grinding Jimmy's new rail. We'd been skating since after dinner, when we started talking about the Deep Woods, the name assigned to the woods behind my house by the local kids. We started telling stories we'd heard at school, and I guess Rochelle was feeling pretty bold. "You guys want to go out in the woods?" Rochelle asked, a sly smile on her face. Truth was, it sounded like a blast. We were all really good at scaring each other and getting all hyped up. It was pretty much immediately unanimous. Claude always had to prove how much of a man he was to everyone, and Jimmy was always down if I was. So we helped Jimmy put his rails and ramps away before putting all of our boards in his garage and headed for the Deep Woods. I opened my gate and closed it behind everyone. "John, go grab your flashlight," Jimmy said, turning to wait for me. I nodded and hurried back around the side of my house to the garage and made my way past the bikes to the old cabinet where we kept everything. After finding the flashlight, I hurried back to find Claude and Rochelle already over the fence. Jimmy was waiting patiently near the fence for me. I jogged across the backyard, Jimmy, after spotting me, climbing the fence and hopping over. I tossed the flashlight over the fence and jammed my right foot into the chain-link fence, pulling myself up and over it, careful not to snag my clothes on the top where the wires twisted into Ys. I dropped down and Jimmy handed me the flashlight, which I promptly turned on and washed it over Rochelle and Claude, both of them with wild, excited eyes. This may come as a shock to some of you, but we had actually never done this before. Creeping through the Deep Woods at night. With all the rumors that floated around it, you'd have to be crazy to not be just a little bit scared, and we were only like 10 to 11 years old at the time, so we believed a lot of stuff that we probably shouldn't have. I might not have been so scared if my parents were nonchalant about the woods, but even they expressed a bit of caution about them. The fact was, while none of us had brought it up before, I think we all secretly wanted to do this at some point. So here we were. The pall of darkness that smothered the world around us, only my flashlight to pierce through it. The four of us moved together deeper into the woods, occasionally jumping at the sudden movement of an animal. There were frequent shushes and, "Did you hear that?" floating around as we went. The flashlight traded hands often, each of us sticking close together. Claude, of course, had to be cool and decided to put some distance between himself and the group, gaining a steady lead on us. I remember at this point, Rochelle, whom held the flashlight, flicked it off for a second and screamed, which caused Claude to slam into us at full speed. He managed to take Jimmy and I down with him, Rochelle illuminating us with the light. We all laughed hysterically at him for a good couple of minutes before getting back to our feet. Admittedly, I jumped too, but nobody had to know that. Claude now sticking close to us, grumbling the whole way. We wandered around until we noticed headlights, and the ground turned from soft soil to cracked pavement. "Yeah, I guess that's it," I said solemnly. I had never wished that the woods were larger until just now. We were having a great time. That's when she said it. "Why can't we keep going?" I turned around and looked across the road. It was true, the woods extended further on the other side of the road, and they were even thicker, more matured. The trees were higher, and the depths darker. The tree lean suddenly put me on edge. I didn't know why, but it did. "Yeah," Claude blurted out in agreement with Rochelle. Jimmy looked at me. Although Rochelle was holding the flashlight, the look on his face was clear. He was very uncertain about it. He looked towards the woods and then back at me. "I'm down if you are," he said, extending his fist for the secret handshake. I chuckled and shook my head before performing the secret handshake and turning towards the road. "All right," I stated firmly. "It's settled then." Claude bounded forward like a happy dog, the three of us hot on his heels as we ventured across the way. Into these new woods, the feel kind of changed. I went from happy and carefree to nervous and paranoid. The shift was sudden and unexplainable. We moved together through the brush, the grass much higher in these woods. "What if these are the deep woods?" Jimmy asked as we walked. "What if all the rumors are true, and they're about these woods, and not the ones back there?" I swallowed. I was more on edge than I would like to admit, and I really wished he hadn't put that thought in my head. "Oh, come on now," Claude piped up. "I made up some of those rumors myself." We laughed at this, which helped lighten this feeling a bit. A few minutes into wandering, I stopped. I was holding the flashlight at this point. "Guys, I think we should turn around," I said finally. "I don't know how deep these woods go, and I don't want us to get lost at night." Rochelle sighed. "That's viable," she responded. Thank God she agreed with me. I knew Jimmy would, and that would make for a majority vote. "Jimmy, you want to head back?" I asked just to be sure. "Yeah," he nodded. "It's late. Another time." "All right, let's dash." I stopped short, flashing my light on Claude. He had his back to us and appeared to be staring intently into the darkness. "Claude. Claude," I repeated, shaking my light around. "Claude," Rochelle called out to him. "What's up, man?" Finally, he responded, though quietly. "Guys, do you see that?" he asked, his voice shaky in a manner that I wasn't used to hearing. "Doesn't that look like a person?" He tilted his head lower. "Claude, come on, games are over," I insisted, not wanting a scare in these unfamiliar woods. You see, in these woods, we felt a lot smaller than when we were in the ones near my house. Suddenly, it felt like there weren't enough of us, and something that I couldn't put my finger on made my hair stand on end. "Claude," I called. "Who has the fucking flashlight?" He asked frantically. "Please, for my own peace of mind, just shine it right there." He lifted his finger ahead. My head dropped and I sighed. "Fine," I stated, "if it'll get this out of your system." I lifted the light to the area he indicated and froze. It definitely did look like there was a man standing there. I was short for words. I held the flashlight steady as we all analyzed the figure. I don't see it, Jimmy whispered as he took a couple of steps past me. I lifted my finger along his shoulder so he could see down my arm like the scope of a gun, my finger the sight. I handed him the flashlight. Right there, I whispered, outlining the contours of the silhouette with my finger. It looks like he's got like a bowler's hat on. Jimmy squinted his eyes as he tried to make it out. When finally, whether he did or didn't see it, he nodded. Yeah, I think I see it. Weird, Rochelle commented. You ever stare at something in the dark long enough that it appears to move a little bit? Like you think you see something long enough that it starts to shift around in place, moving more and more the longer you stay fixated on it, and in the morning it was just a coat? Well, has the thing you're fixated on ever shot from its position at breakneck speed and leaped away into the night? No? It had never happened to me either until just that moment when all hell broke loose. It moved faster than any man could possibly move and put the fear of the devil right in us. There was screaming, commotion, the flashlight bouncing around, panic, dread, and an indomitable urge to escape the woods no matter what the cost. I hit a couple of trees as I ran, but they didn't deter me. I heard my friends running behind me, but to me at that moment, it was that thing hot on my heels. I hit the pavement and nearly got run over by a car as I darted over the road, followed closely by the rest. I stopped at the tree line to turn around just in time to see Claude trample over me for the second time tonight, followed by Jimmy and Rochelle, neither of them with my flashlight. We stopped at the tree line, panicking and holding each other as we looked back across the road. Holy shit, dude. Holy shit. Oh my God. What was that? Did you see how fast it moved? Holy shit. I dropped the flashlight. I'm sorry. So many things said at the same time, all with Claude slewing obscenities over top of it all. We hurried back to my house in the dark, all huddled together. It was only a 10-minute walk, but it felt like we walked for hours. When we finally hit my fence, we hopped it and ran back to the safety of the streetlights in front of Jimmy's house. We all sort of just stood there trying to make sense of what we saw, but nobody could arrive to any conclusions. But we had a bigger problem than that. We dropped my flashlight out there. It was an expensive light that my dad expressly forbade me from using, though I did it all the time anyways. I would have to go back for it, but I never wanted to set foot out there again. I just decided that I would pretend I never touched the flashlight and act clueless as to how it went missing. We sat on the curb for the remaining 20 minutes of our night discussing what we saw before we had to go home. We all saw different things, but there was one thing we could all agree on. It was Man with a Hat. Second story. I've been debating on sharing this story with anyone outside of my small circle of people that were there. But I want to share my experience in hopes that it saves someone's life or to give understanding of what someone else has experienced. Late fall 2010. In northern Canada, I went deep into the wilderness with my father and my eldest brother to hunt for moose. We left in the early morning, just before sunrise, trying to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. We traveled winding rivers and had to repeatedly portage over rapids all day. We decided to set up camp just over halfway to our destination. My father figured that we'd make the rest of the journey tomorrow. Well, when everyone bedded down for the night, I decided to go grab some firewood and relieve myself down by the bank of the river, just out of reach of the light from the campfire. Out from the tree line, about 15 yards away, I could hear rustling in the bushes. I watched the area where I heard the noise and focused on that spot. I felt kind of funny, dizzy/lightheaded, and I could smell this putrid stink, like old milk or rotten food. Then I saw the trees start to morph and move ever so slightly and began to take the shape of a head and slight facial features. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness and along the tree line. I could hear this voice coming from there. I recognized it. The voice sounded like one of my relatives who had recently passed. The face took shape of my relative. "Hello," they said. "I've missed you. Come see me." I smiled and stepped forward a bit but stopped to analyze the situation. My relative's face stopped smiling and became emotionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. Chunks of flesh from their cheeks began to fall away, and I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it at all, so I started to back away and make my way to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice, and I was further away from the firelight. The voice became angry and began shouting at me to come here. So I turned to run away, but as I looked back one more time, I saw the most disgusting thing I had ever seen. It was rotting flesh on gnawed bone, caved-in eyes, and a hollow chest cavity. This humanoid creature was tall and super thin. I ran as fast as I could, trying to yell for help, but the fear had made my voice quiet and raspy. I ran along the riverbank, and I could hear the heavy breaths and the stomping feet from this thing right behind me. I made it onto the top of the riverbank, but it grabbed a hold of my leg as I jumped up. I gripped and tore the grass trying to lift myself, and yelled as loud as I could. Then finally my voice came back, and I yelled that, "Someone has my leg." My brother woke up and ran over to where I was. Then he pulled me up and took me over to the fire. I was terrified, trying to explain what I saw, and that it looked like my relative, but not. I was trying to convince them that I wasn't seeing things, but my brother nodded his head and said, "I saw it too. I know." That solidified it. He acknowledged that it was real. We stayed up all night after that, rifles loaded and close by. We packed up when the sun was coming up and went back home. We haven't shared that story with anyone out of fear of being labeled as crazy or liars. I've had nightmares and couldn't sleep for months afterwards. I would see things/dark figures looking into my window or hear whispers when I was walking home at night. Eventually, I was seeing this dark figure daily. I went to medicine men/shaman for help, but I've learned that the ceremonies only relieves it temporarily. Friends have given me everything from protection pouches to certain crystals. I found out that there's a strong possibility that I encountered a Wendigo. I learned that if you encounter one and survive, it attaches itself to you like a parasite. I learned that it could only do this if it touches you, which it did. Ever since that night, I've been on edge when I enter any forest or wooded area, which sucks because I love being outdoors/hunting and in nature. Now I always feel like I need to keep my back against something when I'm out in the wild. Anyways, make your own conclusions about this. I've paid a price for being an ignorant child to the stories of old. They are real. I can attest to that. Stay safe, everyone. Third story. Deep in the woods, forgotten by time. Forests really are strange, aren't they? Miles and miles of trees. Sometimes so secluded you feel like you may be the only person on Earth while in one. Easy to get lost in. Forests creep a lot of people out, myself included. However, about a week ago, I discovered something I never could have imagined deep in the woods behind my house. I live on a 7.5-acre plot of land, in front of a massive forest that goes on for miles, something quite common for northern Michigan. Though I've lived here for a while, I haven't gone very far into the woods. As someone that grew up in a large town, I found the forest to be rather unsettling. The property I live on is only a few miles from the nearest town, but the town is very small, and in Michigan the change from an urban environment to the wilderness can happen quite fast. The forest behind my house generally consists of evergreen trees and the occasional plot of hardwood trees. For a ways the forest isn't very secluded. However, beyond where my property ends, at the power lines, it becomes very deep, very broad, and you feel hundreds of miles from civilization, although you are only about 3 miles from town, and less than a mile from people's houses. I decided to go as far as I could into the forest, and figured I may see something interesting. It was 10 a.m., and I figured I could spend the day in the wilderness, something I rarely ever do. I grabbed my pack of cigarettes, a lighter, my phone, a flashlight, and a candy bar. I'm not exactly an outdoorsman, so I was a bit nervous. There are bobcats and bears in the area, and I kind of just hoped I wouldn't come across one. I was not expecting to find what I did, however, and the idea that it was there, a few miles behind my house, deep in the woods, makes me shudder at the thought of it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. As I exited my house, I realized it was a bit cold and windy. I shrugged it off and began walking back. It was a cloudy, dreary day, and the bleak, grayish overtone the environment had really didn't make me any more comfortable with wandering into a massive forest, but I pressed on. Within a few minutes, I had finally entered the woods. It was rather dark thanks to the damn trees and the overcast skies, and the wind was not as harsh, but it was still loud and caused the branches of all the trees to sway. While thanks a lot weather, I said out loud, declaring my irritation. I know it seems I was being way too paranoid about a freaking forest, and at the time I thought the same. Now I know it was some kind of warning. My instincts knew there was something back in those woods I didn't want to see, but at the time I figured it was just paranoia. After about 10 minutes or so of making my way through a maze of trees, bushes, logs, and ferns, I finally made it to the power lines. I stopped and lit a cigarette. In both directions, the power lines turned back towards the road, only letting me see a couple 100 yards in each direction. Behind me was my property, my forest, somewhat dense, but familiar, and in front of me was an extremely dense forest, much darker and more unknown than the 5 acres I had just traversed to get to where I was. I smoked the rest of my cigarette and pressed on. I continued my walk for about an hour and a half before spotting something entirely unexpected. Deep in the forest, miles from anything, surrounded by trees so thick it looked like it could be 7 in the evening, was a house. A very old house. I stopped and stared at it. "Oh, come on," I yelled, hoping any nearby animals would know I was there and go away. The sight of the house filled me with dread. It was very old, run down, and covered in moss. All the windows appeared broken, and the front door was gone. I felt a sense of anxiety looking at it, but figured, there's no way anyone lives here. I worked myself up to go inside and grabbed my flashlight and turned it on. The house appeared to be from the early 50s and had only a downstairs floor and apparently a basement. Upon entering, I was overwhelmed by the smell: mold, mildew, must, and dirt. The walls and floors were mossy or moldy. I looked around. I was in a living room. There was a disgusting moldy couch, a broken coffee table, and a very old moldy cracked TV from the 50s. I was fascinated. Everything was rotted and moldy, and the smell was overwhelming. I walked into the next room. It was a kitchen. This is where things get weird. The counters were cluttered with what looked like dirty dishes, with remnants of what was once food on them. The fridge was an old 50s-style rounded fridge that was dark yellow and caked in dust. The broken kitchen window let some light into the room and aired the room out a bit. I looked at the kitchen table. Plates with half-century-old rotten remnants of food were sitting on the table, as if the residents would return any time to finish their meals. I was completely freaked the fuck out at this point. I looked through the cupboards. They were filled with non-perishable canned foods that were very faded and hard to read. There were some jars that I'm assuming held food in the past, but the food was black and nasty now. I opened the fridge. It was filled with nasty maggot-ridden food and some very old beer. I slammed it shut, and the fridge door broke off. I was a bit creeped out, but fascinated at the same time. I checked out the next area past the kitchen. It was a hallway, in the same state of disrepair as the rest of the house. There were 3 doors in the hallway. One of them was locked, and it appeared to be the basement, since there were a couple steps leading down to the door. It had several locks, and I decided there was no way in hell I was going down there. I proceeded to the next doorway, the bathroom. It was a standard 50s bathroom, rotted all to hell with 50-year-old rotted toilet paper next to the smashed-up moldy toilet. The mirror was broken, and the bathtub was filthy, moldy, and rusted. I left the bathroom and proceeded to the next room. It was a bedroom and was rotted to hell much like the other rooms. There were 2 small beds and a bunch of very old moldy stuffed animals in one corner and rusted toy cars in the other. There was an old beat-up dresser against the wall in between the toys and a small broken window in between the beds. I walked up to the closet and looked inside. It was filled with rotted old boxes and some rotted old clothes. I left the bedroom and proceeded to the final room. As I opened the door, it fell out of the doorway and broke in half on the floor. I shined my light into the room. I could see a rotted vanity with brown blotchy stains on the broken mirror. I got a sense of dread but moved on into the room. I turned and looked at the bed and my heart jumped and I screamed out loud. There was a human skeleton on the bed. The clothes were rotted and the skull was completely smashed into pieces, and I saw a gun on the floor nearby. Then I looked at the closet. In front of the closet were 2 smaller skeletons, with rotted clothes and smashed skulls much like the first. I was absolutely terrified but had to see what was in the closet. I walked over and looked in and nearly shit myself. It was another skeleton. It was broken in half, and it appeared that the person had hanged himself. His clothes were rotted and his skeleton had broken off at the bottom of the vertebrae. His hip bone and leg bones were on the floor below him. I was petrified with fear and managed to back out from the room. I turned and was about to run out of the house when I heard banging at the basement door. My heart was beating 1,000,000 miles a minute, and I was petrified with fear again. Then I heard a man's voice scream in my ear, "Get the heck out, Newell. Get out, get out, get out, get out, get out." I jumped and then ran out of the house, nearly tripping several times. I turned around and looked and saw a vague silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. I had enough. I sprinted faster than I ever did in my life and kept sprinting until I got back to my house. I opened the door and slammed it shut, locked it, and collapsed. I sat on the floor in front of my door for 10 minutes before getting up and sitting on the couch. I was freaked out and decided to watch some TV. I decided I wasn't going past the power lines again, if I even went that far in the woods again, which I haven't. I was tempted to call the police, but I decided not to. I hate the cops and don't want them meddling in my business, asking me what I was doing and telling me I was trespassing. It was obvious the apparent murder-suicide happened decades ago, and I figured I'd leave it be. As I sit here typing this, I can't help but think just a few miles away, deep in the woods, is a place where a horrendous crime took place decades ago, and that no one in this area is aware it exists. I have always believed in ghosts to some extent, but now I'm positive they exist. A thought just hit me. Why was there knocking from the basement if the skeletons were in the bedroom? 4th story. I saw something in the woods of Nova Scotia, Canada. I need to know what it was. This is a story I haven't really told anyone. Geez, if it weren't for my best friend being present when it happened, I probably would have gaslit myself into believing it was a nightmare, or I was just going plain nuts. It's one of those memories that, no matter how much time goes by, you never forget. The details don't get muddy for even a moment. It was 2012, my freshman year of high school. I was 15 years old and had been in the company of my best friend that night. Let's call her Marie. We lived in a fairly small town on the eastern coast of Canada, Nova Scotia to be exact. It was an old mining community set in the middle of the woods. To paint a picture for you, there wasn't really much to do. Our economy had tanked many moons before the rest of the country, so outside of hard drugs or crime, all you really had to do was walk around. Marie and I just so happened to have made walking a bit of a natural pastime. We'd properly mapped out that entire town and its surrounding hills and forests in rain, shine, sleet, or snow. We'd seen everything our little community had to offer, from its vast range of wildlife to its colorful selection of junkies. Please, keep these tidbits in mind before you tell me what we saw was an animal or a human. It was an autumn night, with nothing more for two high school girls to do and homework not being something we specialized in. We decided to go on one of our many town walks. This night in particular had us go a little off the beaten trail. You see, typically we'd have stuck to the main roads, probably ended up at a Tim Hortons before calling it a night and heading back home, but not tonight. Tonight we decided to walk by the food bank. You might be wondering what the draw of an old food bank is. You see, it wasn't just a food bank. Back when we were still a mining town, our food bank was a train station. Trains would come by and pick up coal that was freshly dug from the coal mines and take it all across the country. The old train yard was still there, its now rust-covered cars acting as mock tombs to a much more prosperous era gone by. We'd frequented the train yard with our friends in the past, climbing the cars, sneaking inside among other things that could have gotten kids hurt. So it wasn't a new place to us at all, and we thought that since it was at the tree line, tucked away in a quiet enough part of town that we could freely walk and chat without the concern of traffic or the like. Sidewalks weren't very frequent on that side of town. The sun had already set as we made our way down the long stretch of road, that October chill grasping at our small frames like glue, while the all-too-familiar autumn smell of still-dying plant life had permeated the air. We were talking to each other about what teenage girls typically babble about. Boys, Facebook, real important stuff. We had been so caught up in our conversation of the most dire importance that by the time we had made it to the fence that lined the train yard, it genuinely took us a moment to notice the noise. It was a very clear scream. We stopped dead in our tracks and began to stare at each other, not so much out of fear but bewilderment. It didn't quite sound like an animal, but it definitely didn't sound human either. I've gotten up close and personal with enough cougars, wolves, and toddlers to know that this screaming we were hearing was caught somewhere in between man and beast. We stood there, glaring into each other's eyes for a few more seconds before finally turning our attention towards the sound. It was dark, mind you, not pitch black, as there were some street lights around, though few and far between, but we couldn't see anything. To us from where we were standing, it was just an old train station turned food bank, a rusted-out fence, and a couple of unused and falling-apart train cars. The screams didn't subside as we were now staring into the foreground of what became a series of mental photographs of the area. It was then I realized that just up ahead, the third and final train car sat partially covered from our viewpoint by a few bushes. I had turned my head to Marie, a mischievous grin donning my face like a cowl. "Last one to the train car has to buy the French vanillas," I exclaimed before quickly jogging along the side of the fence toward the final car. I heard Marie call out, "Hey, wait up," as my feet clearly were acting before my brain. I mean, gosh, this could have been some wild animal or really anything, and I was just running into blind. I'm not particularly a brave person, and I'm honestly not sure why I did this or anything else that happens from here on out. I rounded the fence, the screaming getting louder and louder as I strode closer and closer. My heart began to race with both anxiety and sheer excitement. I wasn't sure what I was even getting myself into or what I was expecting to see at all. Needless to say, about a second later, the ever-increasing beating from my chest had come to a standstill as my heart had made itself a new home in my throat. I stopped so quickly Marie had slammed right into the back of me, but I was so frozen in fear at what I was now looking at that I barely even budged. the screaming still echoing off of the forest so loudly I could barely hear the faint whisper of an, "Oh my God," escape Marie's lips. No more than about 20 feet away from us, crouched just under the train car, was a pale, hairless, and naked person. It was just sitting there under the front of the car, screaming into the darkness of the autumn night. Each time it screamed, its arms would leer forward from under the car. They extended out to an unnatural length, almost like two tree branches. We both stood there, frozen in a mixture of fear and confusion. What were they doing? Were they hurt? On drugs? A million questions had begun to race through my head, and one look at Marie's face had told me the same questions were racking her mind as well. We must have stood there just watching in complete awe for what felt like 5 minutes, but realistically it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, maybe a minute at the most. That's when, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to take a few steps closer. I took my first shaky step towards it. I felt Marie's hand grasp my arm as if to say, "Don't." But it was clear that her fear outweighed her functionality as I easily broke from her grip just by continuing forward. I had closed about 5 or so feet of distance before stopping. I continued to stare at it from my position for another moment before clearing my throat and stammering the words, "Hey, are you okay?" The second I said those words, any thought of this being a person in need of help had flown out the window and dissipated in the cool nighttime air. Almost as if someone had hit stop on a recording, the screaming it had been happy to emit had ceased, and then it was staring at us. You need to understand, it didn't seem to even move its head. It was just 1 second staring forward into the night and the next right back toward us. A faint growl began to seep into the area now from where it was positioned as I took in the details of its face, in which I had become sure it wasn't human. It had a mouth that seemed to take up the width of most of its face, like a thin crack in a slab of concrete. Its eyes were small but almost glowed in through the darkness with the most piercing yellow I have ever seen. After it had taken its time to mimic our staring back at us, its crack-like mouth had almost cartoonishly curled into a smiling man-like grin, its lips parting to reveal its long, jagged, and razor-like teeth. The beast and I continued locked into this war of attrition, though it was admittedly clearly more confident in being the dominant one in the exchange of looks. It broke the stare down after another moment, bringing its long, twiggy arms up from under the train car. It wrapped its fingers around the lip of the car and at a near breakneck speed kicked itself out from under the train car with a swing, almost like a chimpanzee leaping from one tree branch to another before landing and planting itself on the ground in a pose akin to that of a frog. It continued to its gaze, which now had begun to feel as though I was being sized up. My whole body had been shaking at what was akin to Mach 5. I tried to avert my eyes, look anywhere else, as it felt like any moment I would pass out in sheer terror, but I was drawn in. It felt almost like it had me in some sort of trance. I watched as it slowly began to stand, unfurling itself from the position it was in. It just seemed to get taller and taller until what I was looking at was at its full stance. Its entire body, a pasty gray. Its arms had drooped down well past its knees, and its legs hooked in the back near the calf, almost like a goat. The words "I'm not religious in the slightest," though I was raised Catholic in my younger years, and the only words I could think to muster were "Hail Mary, full of grace," as I began to pray and stared down what I was sure was my end. The creature then leered itself forward, throwing its arms back as its jaw unhinged itself from its skull and dropped down to about its collarbones as it let out one final shriek, the noise embedding itself in my brain and making sure not to ever leave, to forever haunt my nightmares along with the image. I closed my eyes so tight my head began to hurt. I could feel tears streaming down my cheeks with my lips pierced close so tightly that not even a breath could escape them, and then nothing. Silence. Deafening silence. Was it over? That quickly? Was I dead? I slowly opened one eye, peeking out. I saw it. A final look. It had retaken its crouching position, giving us its final glance as well before it turned its back to us. An encounter that had felt like it lasted hours had then swiftly ended in that of a few mere seconds as the creature leapt from its position to the tree line, and then one final leap into the woods. Just like that, it had vanished. I had almost all but forgotten Marie was there until the softness of her voice had brought me back to earth with a Kinsey. What the fuck was? I turned to her. Her skin had gone sheet white and her eyes were red with tears. My legs had finally given out from the sheer exhaustion of it all as I had fallen to my knees, Marie quickly running over and catching me in an embrace as we silently wept. I'm not sure too much of what happened after that. It's all a blur, really. I told some people at first, but they were quick to laugh me off as a liar or that I was simply being over-imaginative, with Marie moving away about a year later and my only witness having gone. That didn't help my credibility. It's been 10 years since then. I no longer live in Nova Scotia and actually live in the same town as my best Marie again. We still bring this up to each other every now and again, but refrain from telling most anyone else out of fear of being labeled crazy. My last words I'd like to say are pretty blunt. If you live in Nova Scotia, Canada, please be careful. There is something living in the woods, and it is not human. Fifth story. I saw a creature in a huge black forest in France. I want to share with you an encounter I made in September 2012 in a French woods in the neighborhood of Bages-en-Anjou. I am not sure of the name of the forest. It could be Les Bois d'Anjou or La Forêt de Ménil de Chandelay. Anyway, I am still haunted by this creepy encounter. I just can't accept being unable to know what was that scary creature. So, I was 20, and I was in an old small truck with an older friend, 55 years old, who was the driver. I was sitting on the passenger place on the right of the truck. The truck was very old, and I remember we couldn't go faster than 30 or 40 kilometers per hour. We were driving since Le Havre in Normandy, and we took only the very small road in order to stop anywhere we wanted to visit old church or abandoned house, German fortification, etc. We were expecting to arrive at our destination, a troglodyte house that belonged to friends of mine, around 3 a.m. in the morning. But we were late, and it was 3 a.m. when we enter a huge dark forest in the night. We were driving slowly in the woods on a straight small road. The old lights of the truck were some kind of blinking yellow. At a point, I saw some very black humanoid outline on the left side of the road. It was a very clear outline because it was in the light of our truck. Otherwise, I wouldn't even have seen it. The creature was on 2 legs as a biped. No tail. At first, I couldn't see any arms. As we were slowly approaching the creature, I saw it turning its head in our direction. We were silent in the truck, saying no words. My friend was just driving, and I was wondering if I was hallucinating. We slowly drive in its direction, and it straight across the road as it was staring at us. It has big yellow eyes like a howl. It was around 1m50 high. We almost were at its level, and I remember fearing that it opened my truck door and grabbed me. I was really in fear. I saw its arms swinging along its thin black hairy body. It has hair on all its body. I saw it at its outline as we approach it. It arrive on the other side of the road and suddenly stop and turn in our direction, still staring at me or us. A few seconds later we passed it, and I didn't move my head, just looking at the right rearview mirror, seeing that it was staring at our truck, letting us drive away from him. My friend and I didn't say a word. And half an hour later, we drive out the dark woods, and I said something like, "Well, weird things in the woods, right?" And my friend was suddenly extremely nervous, saying, "Yeah, did you see that? What the hell was that?" We talked about it, and he saw the same thing than me. He thought he was hallucinating because we were very tired. But no, we saw that thing in the wood. Today he is 60s and I am 30s, and we are both still haunted by this thing. We talk about it every time we meet each other. He is particularly marked by the intelligence in its big yellow eyes. I know this could be explained, but to be honest, I am an urbexer since 2004. I visit the catacombs of Paris every 2 months. I saw weird stuff during my explorations, but I never feared anything. But this thing, it scares me. Really. Anyway, one day I found a picture on the internet. Sadly, I didn't find the artist, and there were no context, but it looks like a lot like what I saw. Expect for the eyes. The creature I saw had very big round yellow eyes. Sixth story. Camping in mid-Michigan. So about 3 years ago, I went camping with my girlfriend, now ex, as she had always expressed interest but never had been. The spot we went to is in the Huron National Forest and is my go-to trail/camp spot as it's hidden deep in the forest and the access to the trails is close and easy for ATVs, etc. My family has been going to this spot for about 6 years and my friends that introduced me about 10 or so years. We went for a weekend trip and I'm glad we didn't go any longer. When we got there, everything was going well except we did notice a group of people that were hanging out next to our campsite, but they were just stargazing and ended up leaving. Then around midnight is when the weird stuff started to happen. At first it sounded like someone was laughing at us, but the laugh never ended and got very high-pitched and sounded as it kept going. After a while, we both got kind of scared and went into the tent to try and sleep, and then that's when the laugh/noise moved up higher and then started to circle the campsite. After a while of that happening, it just suddenly stopped and then started again around 3 a.m. When it started again, the fire was going out, so I went to stoke the fire with my shotgun in hand and turned on my flashlight to see if maybe I could see any coyotes or something around the campsite, but I didn't see anything or hear any movements below. This went on until 6 a.m. and then stopped, and that finally when we were able to get some rest. After we woke up, we checked around the campsite and didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so we packed up. Once we were packed up and good to go, I go to start my vehicle and it's completely dead. That really freaked me out as I'm always paranoid about leaving things plugged in that kill the battery, and made sure everything was closed properly and unplugged, yet somehow the battery still died. I was able to get a jump from AAA. That phone call was hard to explain, and the lady who took the call didn't believe me, but at the end we both laughed. After that happened, I told my friend who had shown me the campsite and also has a cabin in the same forest, roughly 25 miles away from the campsite, about what happened, and he got freaked out. He told me about 2 incidents, which he has had, one at the campsite and one at his cabin. At the campsite, he stated that one night after we had all returned from trail riding and went to bed, he stayed up to hang out by the fire and have a few drinks. While he was hanging out, he was just looking off into the distance and saw a pair of eyes up in the trees looking directly at him. He described them as bioluminescent eyes. And he flashed his high-powered flashlight at them, but there was nothing there. And as soon as the flashlight turned off, they were there looking right back at him. So he packed up and went right to bed. He didn't tell us because he didn't want to scare us. At the cabin, he was hanging out with his brother, and they were both just chilling by the fire outside when they both saw a pair of eyes looking at them from a trail that leads into the woods. They stated that at the height the eyes were looking at them, whatever it was had to be 7 feet plus tall. They started shooting at it with their rifles, 230-30s, and the eyes disappeared, but once they were done they reappeared and were closer. At that point, they both freaked out and got back in the cabin, and they did not leave until daylight. We have no idea what this could have been, but all felt very scared when these events were happening. After we all talked about it, one of the brother thinks it's a Wendigo, SP. I don't really know what it could be, but I haven't felt that scared since. 7th story. I think I had an encounter with a skinwalker or a Wendigo. I am 25-year-old man. I live in Utah, and I'm curious if any of you have seen anything like this before. I'm pretty sure I saw a Wendigo or a skinwalker. I know it sounds strange or crazy. I don't really believe in those things, and I'm regularly skeptical when it comes to the paranormal. This happened to me when I was 17 and in high school and living with my parents. My house at the time was in a very small town. The backyard faced open empty fields and mountains for miles before you reached another civilization at all. My best friend lived next door and shared this field as our backyard in a way. I have to explain that his house was built on a different street that ended in the field with a small cul-de-sac. I think there was supposed to be more houses built down this street to expand the town, but they clearly never got around to it. So his driveway was basically in this cul-de-sac, even though no other houses were built there. This matters later in the story. I used to stay the night at my friend's house a lot in high school because I didn't have the best relationship with my parents. Every once in a while, we would wake up to hear dragging and a weird gargling sound from the back porch. His room was a basement room with the window well to the back porch. It would happen maybe a couple times a month, but whenever we would gather the courage to check, nothing would be back there. This happened for years. One night haunts my friend and I to this day. My friend was getting ready to move, and we would stay up all night playing games and watching movies. We decided to go on a music drive to just vibe. So we hopped in his truck with high beams and swung out of the driveway, turning them on towards the field to use the roundabout. The light illuminated this thing. It looked like a person, but it wasn't. It was naked on all fours. Abnormally large, particularly its limbs that seemed to fold under itself in an unnatural way. Its pale skin clung to it like it had to be stretched onto it. But the part that still sends shivers down my spine is its face. Its jaw hung open to this gaping black maw, like a snake unhinging its jaw to eat. Its black eyes glistened in the light as it looked at us. But just as it turned to see us, it quickly scurried backwards, almost like it was on rewind into the brush of the field. My friend and I were pale as ghosts. We both looked at each other like, "Did you see that too?" We were shaken. Let's just say we tried to have a good rest of the night, but we couldn't believe what we saw. We ended up just sitting there in his basement with guns ready and waiting to hear the gargling and dragging again. But we never did. Sorry that it's not very climactic, but it's the truth. I now don't live in that town anymore. There are times when I visit there, though. That empty field still feels like it's watching and waiting. Even though I can't see it, I can still feel like it's out there. 8th story. North Main Woods. This incident was the most terrifying experience of my life. This happened in the fall of 1982 in Baxter State Park, Maine. I lived in Manchester, New Hampshire at the time and desperately wanted to get one last camping trip in before the weather changed and the region would become buried in snow and tourists from out of state for the skiing season. It was early November, and it was still warm during the day and nice and chilly at night. Perfect for sitting around the fire and relaxing. I loved the outdoors, I still do, but the events of that night in Maine would leave a mark on me for the rest of my life. My wife worked all weekend at the hospital downtown, and both the kids were at Grandma and Grandpa's for the weekend. I called in sick to work, loaded up my Bronco, strapped the canoe on the roof, and hit the interstate. I was on the water late in the afternoon. I loved this area because of how remote it was. I was few miles from my launch site, where the truck was parked, when I spotted a perfect place to camp. I paddled toward the shore. This is a great spot, I thought to myself. I set up my little tent, built a fire, and unfolded my pack chair to relax. The day turned into night, and I crashed out in the tent. The following day, I awoke to the sounds of birds chirping. It was a little cooler, but still great weather. I took my camera out into the forest to take some pictures. I did some fishing and just enjoyed the peaceful stillness of this remote wilderness. The day was uneventful, and soon after dinner, I lay in my tent with my flashlight reading. I must have dozed off because I awoke startled by something moving outside my tent. I lay still, but instinct told me there was something outside. I could hear the carefully placed steps of something. There are moose and black bear up here. Moose can be very dangerous if you walk upon them by surprise. The bears generally smell you before you see them and keep away. I lay still and listened. Whatever it was had stopped at the entrance flap of the tent. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out a faint shadowy shape. I was wide awake now and on full alert. Whatever it was, I could hear it sniffing around and the panting of breath. I slowly began to unzip the tent when it ran off. I unzipped the flap of my tent and looked out just in time to see the branches swaying and hear the sound of something moving through the brush and into the deep woods. The sound of its footfalls told me one important thing. It was on two legs. That couldn't be right. I hadn't seen any other people since entering the park and leaving my truck at the trailhead. The tourist season for leaf peepers had passed, and even so, someone could only reach this location by the waterway. I suppose someone could be out here, someone I hadn't seen or heard until they came sniffing and snorting around my campsite in the middle of the night. I guess it was possible. As the sun rose, I ate my breakfast but remained on guard. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I felt a presence in the forest. Someone or something, just out of sight. I kept a .45 revolver when I camped out here in the Northwoods. I wasn't concerned about the wildlife so much as the weirdos you might run across, the meth heads, the backcountry types. In my experience, the scariest thing you can come across when you're alone in the deep woods is another human. I couldn't be sure if someone were out there, but the paranoia had begun to take hold. It was dark now, and I was inside my tent. I kept the revolver close and my boots on. I was done playing games. I sure didn't plan on shooting anyone, but I was damn sure to show them I was no easy target. I sat up quickly. I must have fallen asleep again because I was startled awake by movement all around the tent. The shadows everywhere, on all sides, in all directions. I could hear sniffing and snorting, low grunting, and raspy breathing. What the hell is happening? I thought in a panic. It didn't sound like people, but the height of the shadows cast against the flaps of the tent in the moonlight revealed prominent, upright figures. There must have been 5 or maybe 6 on all sides. Fear gripped me as the realization came over me. I was surrounded. The low growling stared. It was answered back on the other side and all around me. Low, deliberate growling. Were these coyotes? Were the massive shadows just the light playing tricks on me? The growling increased in pitch and intensified, and I knew an attack was imminent. I pulled my revolver and fired straight up in the air. The next moments were a complete blur. I charged through the tent with just the clothes on my back, my .45, and the truck keys in my pocket. I bolted straight for the canoe and muscled it into the water. I jumped in and began paddling. I never looked back until I got far enough from the shore. I should have never looked back. They were standing completely still on the riverbank. Their bodies crouched down, with heads low, eyes reflecting in the moonlight. They looked like giant coyotes or maybe even wolves, 6 in total. I was transfixed by what I was seeing. I had never seen a coyote this large, this massive. As I sat in the safety of my little canoe studying these creatures, they did something I will never forget. They began to stand up on their hind legs. Each one would slowly raise to 2 legs. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They all stood like men. These things. These creatures that had almost ambushed me as their prey. I turned and furiously paddled as the howling rang out behind me. 9th story. The Nightmare in Whispering Woods. I don't have much time, so I'll get straight to the point. My name is Ryan, and I'm writing this post in a state of sheer terror and desperation. I find myself trapped in an unimaginable nightmare, hiding deep within the sinister clutches of the Whispering Woods. Please, I need your help, your guidance, anything you can offer me. I fear for my life, and every passing moment feels like a step closer to my ultimate doom. It all started a few nights ago when I made the grave mistake of venturing into the heart of these cursed woods. I was driven by an insatiable curiosity, compelled to uncover the secrets that lay hidden within its enigmatic depths. Little did I know that my decision would plunge me into a world of unspeakable horrors and unrelenting terror. As I ventured deeper into the forest, a sense of impending doom began to tighten its grip around my trembling heart. The air grew thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant howl of a lone wolf. Shadows danced wickedly amidst the trees, whispering secrets I couldn't comprehend. They seemed to taunt me, their spectral forms flickering with an otherworldly glow that sent shivers down my spine. The deeper I delved, the more I became aware of an unseen presence watching my every move. I could feel its malevolence, its insatiable hunger for my soul. Each step I took felt like treading on a razor's edge, never knowing what sinister entity lurked just beyond my line of sight. I could sense its malicious intent, the suffocating darkness that enveloped me, threatening to swallow me whole. Nightmares plagued my restless sleep, tormenting me with grotesque visions and twisted apparitions. I would wake up drenched in cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, only to find the surrounding woods eerily silent, as if they were holding their breath, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I have found a hiding spot deep within the heart of these woods, a small makeshift shelter where I pray I am safe from the clutches of whatever malevolent force stalks me. But even here, I can't escape the feeling of being watched, the haunting whispers that echo through the trees. I can't shake the feeling that time is running out, that my fragile sanctuary may soon be discovered. Days blur into nights as I try to make sense of the horrors that surround me. Strange phenomena occur with increasing frequency. Flickering lights in the distance, disembodied voices carrying through the wind, and unsettling whispers that seem to call out my name. The forest itself feels alive, its twisted branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, trying to ensnare me within its grasp. Food and water are dwindling, and the fear of venturing out to find supplies weighs heavily on my mind. The mere thought of exposing myself to the unknown horrors that lurk in the shadows sends chills down my spine. Yet, I know I cannot stay hidden forever. I need a plan, a way to escape this nightmarish labyrinth and find my way back to safety. If you're reading this, please understand the urgency of my situation. I need your collective knowledge and expertise to navigate the treacherous terrain of the Whispering Woods. Have any of you encountered similar circumstances? Is there a way to appease the malevolent spirits that haunt these woods, or a secret path that leads to freedom? Any advice, no matter how small, could be the key to my survival. If you are unable to reach out, please spread the word about Whispering Woods. God forbid anyone stumbles upon it again and relives my nightmare. 10th story. I took a picture of a creature deep in a national forest. A few days ago, my little brother Rob and I set out on a multi-day hiking trip through the Appalachian Mountains. We're both pretty good outdoorsmen and brought only what we could carry on our backs. We purposefully set off to avoid established trails, hoping to discover some place that no one had ever explored before. The first 2 days were beautiful. We walked through trees, crossed some small streams, and took some great pictures. The temperature was unseasonably warm, so much so that we often took off our sweaters to not overheat. It was the 3rd day that the strangeness started. As we climbed a ridge, Rob noticed that some of the dirt had been eroded away, leaving stone. Somebody had clearly carved stairs into the stone. We followed them as we climbed. If you've spent any time in the woods, you know that there are several telltale signs of human activity. Trash, campfires, that sort of thing. We hadn't seen any of them up to this point, so seeing stairs excited and confused us. How old were they? Were they carved by Native Americans? The stone path continued deeper into the woods. We didn't have a better plan, so we decided to see where it led. At times it was hard to keep track of, but after some searching, we would always pick it up again. Later that night we set up our tent, and I stepped outside to look up at the stars. They were not the same stars that I'd seen the past 2 nights. Now, I know many of you may be asking me what I mean. After all, most people can only identify the Big Dipper or Orion's belt at most. Not me, though. I'm studying astronomy in college right now. My on-campus job is to align telescopes to the right spot in the right constellation. So when I tell you the stars were not right, I know what I'm talking about. There were stars, for sure. Just not any constellations I recognized. And that's what unsettled me the most. I returned to the campsite to tell Rob, but he cut me off. "Does it smell strange to you?" he asked. It did. I couldn't explain it very well, but the air smelled off. They say that smells activate memories more than any other sense, and this one was powerful. It reminded me of a cave I'd nearly been trapped in as a teenager. It reminded me of the car accident I'd seen a year back. I don't mean to say it actually smelt like any of those things, just that it reminded me of them somehow. We went to bed feeling uneasy. Our compass still worked, and I told myself I might have missed constellations due to overworking myself. I knew that wasn't true, but it's what got me to sleep that night. The next day we set out again, determined to get through this strange part of the forest. The sense of disorientation from the night before got worse and worse, though. If we weren't staring directly at our compasses, we found ourselves lost in the woods, forced to hack our way back onto the stone path. The forest grew thick and muggy, and the trail led us into a steep valley. We were forced to continue forward. I kept seeing something in the woods out of the corner of my eye. Rob reported seeing the same thing. The forest was dark, though, despite it being near midday. We started switching off which one of us was the guide, but the forest was so thick that it was hard to keep an eye on our compasses for long. "Dude," Rob said from in front of me. I paused, following his gaze. He was staring up at a tree. 3 squirrels were hanging from it, each with trails of blood soaking the tree beneath them. A symbol was carved above them that I didn't recognize. We stared at it for a long time, not sure of what to do. The squirrels couldn't have been more than a few days old. We talked about it and made the decision to push on ahead. We were almost through the park, and we'd come across a road if we made it through to the other side. We might not have made that decision if we knew we'd pass a dozen more trees just like that one along the stone trail. Some trees were strung up with squirrels, but we saw raccoons, bunnies, even the remains of a deer rotting on a tree. We tried not to look at them and instead pressed on with more speed. We were pausing to drink some water when I heard a low croaking sound from behind us. I turned and for the first time saw the black figure. It was a woman, crouched down in the underbrush. She was staring at the 2 of us. My entire body screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. The smell from earlier was thick and heavy in the air. I swapped my phone to the camera and took a picture, not daring to move. The snap of my phone was enough to break us out of our trance, and we took off running. We followed the stone trail back the way we'd come, not slowing down until we were puffing for air. We looked around, but didn't see her. When we'd caught our breath a little, we continued, not stopping until we'd passed the first stone steps on the ridge late that night. I'm not sure what we saw or what it was. If anyone has heard about an entity like this in the forest, please let us know. I'm scared. It's been a few days, and I still smell it. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.